Hello friends, SentinalhMC here, and welcome back to our Applied Energistics tutorial series. In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at some of the necessary components that go into the ME network. So, the first thing we need to talk about is the ME controller. You're going to need one of these for any larger ME network because, and we're going to talk, let me preface this whole thing by saying we're going to have an episode of this series specifically dedicated to talking about bandwidth and bus size. Okay, that's one of the things I know a lot of people get confused about. It's going to have its own episode. But just to briefly mention, without one of these, the most components that you can have on your ME network is 8. Okay, and the ME controller, on the other hand, allows you to have 8 per side, and we'll talk about this in depth in a future episode. So you're going to want an ME controller. You can see here it looks really cool. Once you start getting into the more complex ME systems. And it's crafted like so. Turn off that for clutter's sake. With an engineering processor in the middle. Remember, that's the one that's made with Certus quartz. 4 pure Fluix crystals. Now, in this case, I remember saying that in most cases, if you can use pure, you can also use normal. What actually that means is that if you can use a normal crystal, you can usually use a pure one. However, in this case, you must use pure Fluix crystals, which means you do have to grow them, okay, which is no problem, because we already did a video on that. And 4 skystone blocks. So you're going to, obviously, by this point, you'll probably have gotten to some meteors, but if you haven't, you're going to need some skystone in order to make this ME controller. So once you have that, you can craft the ME controller. Okay? And like we just said, the ME controller's main job is providing more bandwidth for a larger, more complex ME network. Okay? The next thing we're going to talk about here is the ME drive. Now, in the previous episode of this series, we talked about how you use storage disks to store your items in a system, and we used the ME chest, which can only store 1 of them. The ME drive, on the other hand, can store 10 of them. Okay, so it's a single block that stores 10 drives, which makes it, this is the backbone of your ME system. This is how you build your server room full of items. So you're going to probably build several of these over your course of your AE adventures, although you can get away with just 1 of them if you just keep upgrading to the larger drives. Anyway, to craft the ME drive, you're going to need 2 engineering processors, 4 iron ingots, which go in the corners, and 2 ME glass cables. Once you have that, you can craft yourself an ME drive, and it just works simply. You just right-click it, you have 10 slots to put drives in, and that's it. The drive block doesn't do anything else but store drives. You can plug it into your network, you can stick it directly next to another block, you can attach it with cable, it doesn't matter. The drive is just there to hold the disks. It doesn't do anything else. It doesn't do anything else itself. Every single block in this mod has a priority value, which I'm not 100% sure what it does. The word priority kind of tells you what it does, but we'll talk about that later. Okay, so now that you have your ME controller and your ME drive, you're probably wondering, well, how do I access the items in the drive? With the chest, you can just right-click on the top of it. That's what this ME terminal comes in handy for. In the chest video, we showed you how to craft ME terminals, and basically you just plug an ME terminal in somewhere in your network, right-click on it, and you can see everything that's in it. And you can pull items out and put items in through the terminal. Okay, so once you upgrade to an ME drive, this is why I often totally skip the ME chest, because the ME chest requires a terminal to craft it, and you could just use that terminal and craft the drive. But anyway, that's that. If you use an ME drives, you're going to need a terminal somewhere. Okay? That's basically all that was for. Now you're going to need you're probably going to want a way to get items in and out of your system without pulling them out and putting them in manually. The entire point of Applied Energistics, other than just storing an immense amount of stuff in a single block, is to allow you to automate the process of using other machines. Automate a network. You can fully automate almost anything using Applied Energistics because you can put items into machines, take items out of machines, transfer items instantaneously over vast distances. You can do a lot of stuff with this as far as automation goes, and you're going to need a couple of things in order to do that. one of them that you're going to end up using at some point is the ME interface. Now, the ME interface, we're going to talk about all of these blocks in more detail later, but when we actually use them. But the ME interface is a basic block that allows Applied Energistics to interact with other mods. So essentially, a great example is Buildcraft. Buildcraft uses pipes. There are some things that you're going to want to send through pipes or through other things if you're using Buildcraft. Well, if you shove a Buildcraft pipe on the side of an ME interface, you can put the items from that pipe into your ME system, or vice versa. You can output items from your ME interface into the pipes and tubes and stuff of other mods. So the ME interface is used to interface your Applied Energistics 2 system with the machines and the pipes of other mods. The ME interface is crafted using 2 blocks of glass, 4 blocks of iron, an annihilation core, and a formation core, both of which we talked about how to make in the previous episode. Okay, once you have that, you have the ME interface. Now, the ME interface does have another little thing that it can do. You're not limited to just the block itself. If I place another crafting station down and I put an ME interface in here, you'll notice that it changes. It changes to like a flat plane. Okay, you can convert your ME interfaces to a flat plane and back to a regular block. And the reason that you might want to do this is if, for example, you want to put multiple of these ME interfaces in a single block, because you can actually do that. See? You have to connect all those with a cable. So if you wanted to do that, you have the ability to do that with the ME interface. You also need this as a crafting component for certain things. Okay, so that's the ME interface. It helps you interface Applied Energistics 2 with other mods. Now we'll talk about these 3 things. They're very similar in functionality to each other, but they're very different. The import bus, the export bus, and the storage bus are the 3 things I personally use most often when I am interacting with other mods. I have used the ME interface, but not as much. The import bus, as you might be thinking by the word import, it is the primary method by which you pull items from another thing and shove them into your ME system. Okay, and we're going to go through this briefly using that chest over there. So the import bus is crafted using a sticky piston, 2 iron ingots, and an annihilation core. The import bus is one directional. All it can do is pull items from another inventory or from a machine and put them into your ME system, whereby the ME interface is bidirectional. You can push items into the AE system as well as export items out of the system using one ME interface. But the import bus only goes one way. It takes in items and puts them into your ME system. The export bus then does the exact opposite. The export bus is used to take items from your ME system and put it into another machine. So, if, for example, I had a bunch of ores in my ME system and I wanted to put them into the ore processing setup of another mod, I would use an export bus to do that. Because when it's talking about importing and exporting, it means from the ME system. Okay? So the export bus is crafted using a normal piston, not a sticky one, 2 iron ingots, and a formation core. Okay? I want to briefly describe the formation and annihilation cores and what they're used for. The formation core is referring to taking... Applied Energistics stores items as data. That's the lore behind it. It uses the whole E = MC squared thing to transform matter into data, which it can store on a hard disk drive. The formation core takes that data and forms it into the actual item, whereas the annihilation core breaks down an object and transforms it into data. That's why the annihilation core is used in the import bus, and the formation core is used in the export bus, and the ME interface needs both. I really hope that wasn't confusing, because it's just basically lore. It's not actually necessary information. Now we'll take a look at the storage bus, which I actually use quite a bit, because it's really nice if you have a storage system of a different mod built up, and then you want to do Applied Energistics, but you don't want to take down everything you already have. Now, the storage bus is fundamentally different than the import bus and the export bus. The import and export buses actually move the items from another inventory into the Applied Energistics system, or takes the items out of the Applied Energistics system and pushes them into a different inventory. The storage bus, on the other hand, makes the inventory part of the ME system. Okay, and we'll talk about this in just a moment. But the storage bus is crafted using an ME interface, a sticky piston, and a piston. Okay, so that's why we need to talk about the ME interface. So over here, I've got and I need to get some more coal or something for the vibration chamber because it's out of power, but I've still got some power in this energy cell. Over here, I've got an extremely basic, very tiny ME system using a controller, even though this doesn't need a controller, an ME drive, and a terminal. Okay, I've also got this bit of cable connected to a storage bus connected to this chest. Okay, if I look in my ME terminal, I have these items, a bunch of junk, in my ME system. Okay, we've got a storage component, we've got some Certus quartz blocks, some Fluix blocks, and some quartz glass. Alright, now I want you to see what happens if I pull this storage drive out. There's still items in the ME system. We've lost some of the items, like the big stacks, but there's still items in here. That's because those items were not in the drive, they were in this chest. Okay? What the storage bus has done is it makes the items in the chest available to the ME system. Okay? So, that's why I said if you've already got a storage chests and stuff already set up, but you don't want to take all the items out and manually shove them in your new ME system, you could just run cables over and run storage buses on them. The storage bus is useful if you have large inventories of other mods, or if you have items that you want stored locally but still available to the system. This chest, for example, is right next to this ME system, but let's say this chest was way over here in a different area. Let's say you had various items that you often used in that area. You don't want to walk all the way back to your ME system to get them. Now, what you could do is you could run a cable over there and you could put the terminal over there. But let's say you just want them stored in a physical location over there, so that in case your power runs out in your system, you aren't locked out of those items. You can use a chest or another storage device, and you can use the ME storage bus on it. The items that you put in the chest will still be physically stored in the chest, but will also be available to your ME network. So that's the main gist of the storage bus and how it differs between the other two buses. It doesn't actually move the contents of the chest or inventory it's attached to until you pull them out. Now, if I right-click on the storage bus, you can see there's a couple of options on the left. We're not going to worry about partition storage. We're not going to worry. This is like here. We're not going to worry about this filter screen at the moment. What I want to talk about just briefly here is this input-output mode. Okay. If you look at this chest, you can see we've got some logic processors. Now, let's see what happens if I add another logic processor into this ME system. There's 4 now. However, if I go to my chest, there's still only 3. That's because I have this currently set to extract only. That means that adding items into my ME system through my terminal will not push them into this chest, which is a very useful thing if you want this chest somewhere in your base and you only want it to contain certain items. Otherwise, if I flip this back to, well, we can also do insert only, and we can do bidirectional. So now, if I was to pull this logic processor out of the chest, if I add it into the logic, back into the ME system, it now goes, well, it didn't actually go into the chest, but it could have. If I now pull my drive out, you can see it took one of them with it. But these are options that we'll talk about in more depth in the future when we actually need to configure stuff. But that's the storage bus. You attach it to an inventory, and it makes those items available to the network without actually moving them until you pull them out yourself. However, if we break this, and we grab ourselves an import bus, if we slap an import bus on this, you'll see that the items are slowly draining out of the chest. Well, quickly draining out of the chest. Because the import bus pulls items out of an inventory and puts them into the ME network, into the storage disks. Now, there are options. By default, you have one filter option. You can throw an upgrade into this to give yourself more, but we'll talk about upgrades in a future episode. So, let's say, for example, I don't want this import bus pulling everything out of this chest. Let me grab this Fluix dust out. Okay, so now I've got 6 Fluix dust. Let's say I want to put multiple items in this, but I only want my import bus to pull Fluix dust out of this chest. If I put a piece of Fluix dust, it doesn't actually take the item into my import bus. I can throw as many other items, I don't want to throw those in there, as I want into this chest. It'll only pull out Fluix dust. And you can see there, it is slowly pulling out Fluix dust. If you've watched my other tutorial series for any length of time, especially my ReactorCraft series of videos, you know that I like to use an ME system to manage the fuel in my nuclear reactors, and I do that using export buses for the fuel and import buses for the nuclear waste. And I use the filter in order to prevent various things from going in. Now, let's talk about the export bus. Well, we see that the import bus pulls items out of our system and puts it in the chest. What do we think is going to happen if we put the export bus on it? Nothing. You'll notice there's actually no items going into this chest. If I pull out the sticky pistons, we can see that no items are moving into this chest. However, if I put sticky piston into this filter, and then I add them to the ME network, you can see that they're being pulled out, and they're going into this chest. So import and export buses work differently. Export buses, when they're attached to, at least when they're attached to inventories like this, don't automatically pull everything out of your ME system and throw it into that inventory. You need to tell it which items you want it to pull out. Export buses, I find, are especially useful when I want to, like I've mentioned before, if you have an ore processing system and you want all of the ore that goes into your ME system going into that system, you can use export buses. Now, the interesting thing is you can also use storage buses for things like that, and you can tell it that you want to store a certain amount of a certain item. But we'll get into that later in a different video. Needless to say, the difference between the import and export bus is that the import bus tries to import everything, whereas the export bus will only export what you tell it to. Okay? We're going to talk about the ME interface in more detail in a future video. We're going to throw down some mod stuff and show it in action. However, that's it for this video. I wanted to talk briefly about these import, export, and storage buses and the interface, and how they interact with the outside world. Remember, you need an import bus to take items from the world and put them into your ME system. You need an export bus to take them out. The import bus is indiscriminate in what it pulls in unless you tell it only to pull a certain item. But the export bus needs to know what items you want it to export out of the system. And the storage bus simply makes an inventory accessible to the ME system. We just ran out of power. So now we can't access the system. But we can still get into this chest. So I hope this episode was not confusing. I hope that you can understand what we're talking about here. You need to understand how these buses work, because they're the primary method of actually using your Applied Energistics system to do things other than manually storing items. In the next video, we're going to talk about bandwidth and buses, because this is an extremely important part of Applied Energistics 2, and it's actually the part of AE2 that a lot of people didn't like, mainly because they thought it was too difficult. It's really not. So the next episode of this series is going to be all about bandwidth. So, I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Stay tuned for future episodes and videos of all different kinds. I'm SentinalH, and I'm signing out.